Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is TeacherCast Podcast, episode number 203. I hope you guys are enjoying what is turning out to be an incredibly hot summer. We've been having over 100-degree temperature here on the island in New Jersey. I want to know how you guys are doing. Please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at TeacherCast, and of course, leave us a voice message over at teachercast.net/voicemail. I want to know how you guys are doing. We have a great show on for you today. Today we're talking to somebody who is an educator. He was an English teacher. He was a technology coordinator, and now he is the CEO and founder of an amazing professional development network called EdTechTeam. I want to introduce my good friend, Dr. Mark Wagner. Mark, how are you today? Welcome to the program.
I'm good. Thanks, Jeff. And we were just joking before. It's, as usual, 75 and sunny here in Irvine. So. Well, not doing too badly.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. I am looking forward to this conversation. I know everybody out there listening has had to have come across EdTechTeam in some way at a conference or at an ISTE or something. Let's just kind of dive into this because we're going to hit a ton of topics today. Talk to us a little bit about yourself and how did you go from classroom to EdTechTeam? I guess let's just back up. Who is Mark Wagner?
That's a lot of questions already. By the way, speaking of chatting before this, I don't know if the Voltron conversation will wind up in the director's edition or the deleted scenes, but it's good to be here and good to chat. I think you sort of shared the bare bones of it. I was a high school English teacher, and if you want to go back that far, there was an opportunity where the tech coordinator of the school stepped down in frustration. No surprise, right? And I had some ideas about how it might be done differently. So it was great to have that opportunity, to have the support of my principal and the staff at the time. And I was very much in the right place at the right time. We had some anonymous funds donated anonymously for science education, and they spent a lot of that on technology. So I got to be in the right place at the right time to really invest in our school network and to invest in the computers and the software that the kids had access to, and that opened doors for me. So I got an opportunity at the district level to manage. It was actually an early 1-to-1 grant. We put Palm Tungsten E handhelds into the hands of 1,300 middle school kids, and that was there were really some bright points and some low points and as much chaos as you can imagine. But I learned a lot from that project, and that opened some doors for work at the Orange County Department of Ed here in California. And in that role, at least nominally, I oversaw education technology professional development for 30 school districts and 500,000 kids. It doesn't mean any of the teachers knew who I was or utilized our services, but we were there. And I only did that for about 18 months. And it was a very sort of political culture. And in the end, I realized I could, for the sort of work I was doing for them and what they were charging schools for, I could step away and do it on my own. And there was some big changes in my life. I often joke that quitting caffeine helped me quit my job because that tunnel vision wasn't there anymore. But sure enough, when I quit my job and made some space in my life, there was more than enough things to rush in and fill it. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do it right and incorporated and set up the business from the get-go. Rather than sort of doing the consultant speaker, just send me some checks in the mail gig. I wanted to be sure that I set up a company right off the bat, and I suppose doing that opened some doors too. My first big client, as a lot of people know, was the Computer Using Educators nonprofit in California, and through them ended up doing work with Google and working on the very first Google Teacher Academy, and that's sort of like it has for a lot of people. I think was the rocket strapped to my back, if you will. So I was a coach at the very first Google Teacher Academy, and I was at the third, and after that, I ran it for a number of years through Q. And obviously, as years passed, EdTechTeam picked up that contract rather than subcontracting, and have run it for the last several years too. So that sort of being in a position to be a Google partner before there was a Google partner program obviously opened a lot of doors. And in 2011, a few of us had the idea that we wanted to not just create the first Google for Education Summit in Google Apps for Education in those days, Summit in California, but we wanted to, if we we're going to put all this work into it, we wanted to take it on the road. So that very first year in 2012, we launched the first summit in July, and we had 9 of them by the end of the year, including Mexico and Singapore, and went international straight away. So that obviously led to a lot of other things, and it doubled every year for several years. We did, I think, 28 in the next year, and 49 the next year, and 102 the year after that, and then been until last year at about 100 summits a year. We've cut way back on that this year because the context is really different, and we realized we were working just as hard for these smaller events 90 miles down the road from each other, but. So we're sort of focusing on the bigger ones and making a more regional approach against sort of what it was to begin with. But along the route, that opportunity to, from a business perspective, because I know that's part of the topic you're interested in, that moved us out of a position of twiddling our thumbs and waiting for school districts to pay us to collecting all the money up front from ticket sales. And that fueled a lot of our growth.
It's an interesting history listening to here, and so many teachers I've had the opportunity over the last few months to work with want to figure out, not just how to create a business to help supplement their income, but really go out of their way and make a difference in this world. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm anxious to talk to you about, and I've been really deep diving since we caught up at ISTE, is your book that came out last year called More Now. And in there, you said that the book is designed to help people raise awareness regarding what's possible today, to inspire you to develop your own vision for the future, and to empower you to take that next step yourself. I think that's awesome. And I look at the work that we're doing here on TeacherCast, and I look at the work that so many educators out there are trying to do, whether it be in the consulting room or as tech coaches or even just any kind of edu or entrepreneurship here. The whole concept of inspiring people to develop their own vision for the future. What does that mean to you? How did you come up with that? And how is that leading not only everything you did here in the book, but everything that EdTechTeam is doing?
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to that, and I think I can sort of complete a thought and transition into what you're asking about, in the sense that having that sort of change in our business model and collecting ticket money up front allowed us to start a lot of other things. That allowed us to launch Breakout EDU, and it allowed us to do things like the Dynamic Learning Project and the work we did with Facebook, and launch things like Student Voice Foundation and our Voice Academy. And that sort of, to some degree, being in the right place at the right time, and to some degree making prudent decisions about our business model, open the doors to make a lot of impact. And I think a big transition for us conceptually, although our mission kind of was always the same from the beginning, what happened in 2013, 2014. I incorporated in 2006, and benefit corporations didn't exist in California at the time. So by 2013, 2014, they did, and we learned about them and decided to switch the company to a benefit corporation. So a California benefit corporation is going to be taxed like an ordinary corporation. It's still for profit, but the bottom line is the mission, not the profit. And the impact that we make is ultimately what we're after. So the directors can make decisions based on furthering the mission, not rather than necessarily maximizing profit, which is typically the fiduciary responsibility of company directors, right? So we formalize the fact that whatever happens to this company in the future, we're not beholden to maximize shareholder value. For instance, we're beholden to maximizing impact in schools. So our one simple version of our mission is that we inspire and empower educators, right? And that's, when I break that down, the inspiring is that giving them a sense of what's possible, helping them see what people are doing today and what they could be doing. And that the empowering is making them feel like they can do it, when they go back to their classroom or their school on Monday, right? So the book really was an effort to capture a lot of what the work we were already doing. It was an effort to capture a lot of my own sessions and a lot of the sort of stories and anecdotes that I told over and over again. And it was an attempt to capture the philosophy behind the company. And that's where the Honeycomb comes from. And I can talk more about that. But to sort of start with your ending question there about, encouraging people to develop their own visions for the future. I've always been a pretty decentralized guy, and to some degree that even at the size EdTechTeam is now, and we've got just about 40 employees and 400 contractors, and there's parts of that somewhat go against my edu-blogger rebel ethic, if you will, in the sense that you do have to make some compromises to lead an organization that you wouldn't have to make as an individual, right? But I'm not philosophically, I'm not the sort of person that wants to see a top-down implementation, that wants to see a standardization in the classroom, that wants to see a system that everybody can implement, because I don't think that's really what's valuable about what's happening in schools. I think teachers sharing their passions and expertise is much more valuable, and kids having a unique path through the school and a unique experience because it's a unique teacher is much more important. And I think the sorts of tools I get excited about, whether it's Google's tools, open-ended tools like Google Docs or Google Sites or anything that or Blogger that people are using to publish with, or other blogging platforms or wikis or podcasts and this sort of thing. The idea that in a lot anyone can publish today to a global audience, right? Like that sort of thing is much more important to me, that we teach and share and spread tools that are open-ended and can serve the purposes of the person using them, whatever their passions and interests might be. And that's really the value of helping kids solve the problems that they're going to encounter in the future. Us standardizing education now to anybody's vision is not going to help with the diversity of problems we're going to face. And I think a more open-ended system is more in keeping with what we're going to need, or at least it's more in keeping with my vision.
I think one of the things is
I'd like everybody to have my vision of plurality, really.
Well, but that's tough, right? I mean, when we look at professional development, and we have a chance to work with a lot of tech coaches who are then training the adults to do that, and that's really what EdTechTeam is known for. Their summits, their PD, all these different things. As we're looking forward to going back to school in the summer, I know a lot of teachers are asking themselves, how can I make things different? How do I not just go back to, last year part 2? And one of the things that you mentioned in the book is this quote of, "You are the architect of the possible." It is everybody's job to figure out what is possible and then let it happen. Again, whether it be something open-ended for the students to find their way, or as an educational leader to set the stage and let their teachers be the guide. What does that whole concept of architect of the possible, that fits right into everything that you just said about what Google Docs is, being open-ended and open everything. But also, as far as business owners, I mean, it really does kind of mean the future is whatever you want to make it. Your companies are whatever you want to make it. Yeah,
I think I was reading something else that comes to mind right now. I'm not going to be able to cite it just right, but it was suggesting that a lot of people sort of think very deliberately about the future, I think. I mean, some people don't, obviously. But even the people that think deliberately about the future sometimes miss the fact that we're creating it all the time. Like all of us together in little increments every day are creating the future. And I think the more intentional we can be about that, the better. And that the architect of the possible phrase, that actually comes from the slip of paper that came with Google Glass, right? And I was sure how ambivalent I was about being invited to spend $1,500 on Google Glass. But when I opened the box and saw that paper that said, you're an architect of the possible, I then I was in. I'm like, yes, this is absolutely why I do this. It's why I love the bleeding edge of technology, and it's why I love seeing what teachers do with it in schools. And regarding decentralization, there's no way I could come up with all of these things myself. Like this book is full of other voices and full of other leaders and full of other examples. And it's, perhaps my unique contribution is to be able to share that with people, but to share what I've seen in the schools around the world. But there's no way one person could come up with all that. You've got to put the tools in the hands of people to let them do it. I sort of lost the train of my thought there, but the idea that we're always creating the future, whether we like it or not. We need to be intentional about that and creating the sort of future we want to see. And frankly, if I could bring another geeky topic into it, I don't see it behind you. I see your Voltron and your it's not a Koopa Trooper, but Bowser, right?
That is Bowser, yes.
Yeah, but I find myself reinvigorated about the Star Trek franchise as it's all coming back. But I was a huge Trekkie as a kid. I mean, like 5th grade, I was watching all the original series and playing the role-playing game. One of the things that inspires me about that vision of the future is that people are working together, using technology and science to solve problems. And I think ultimately, if the work we're doing here at EdTechTeam serves to bit by bit build a future where that's possible, where our kids are going to have a world where more people are working together using science and technology to solve problems. I think that will have been, that'll be work I'm proud of.
Talking today to Dr. Mark Wagner, author of More Now, a message from the future for the educators of today. And you keep talking about this whole concept of what can we learn, where can we go, and the future is ours. I want you to talk a little bit about the Student Voice Foundation. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but what exactly is the Student Voice Foundation? Yeah,
the story behind it is kind of interesting too, because they're shout out to James Sanders, the founder of Breakout EDU. When he first came to work with us. I'd met him, of course, through the Google Teacher Academy, and he did the first YouTube Teacher Studio there in, I think it was 2011, and in Seattle. And a couple of years later, after he'd done some work with YouTube and with Chromebooks, he wound up doing a internship at the White House. And toward the end of that, he had come up with this phrase, really more than anything, this idea of future-ready schools, and had shared that on the it eventually sort of made it to the White House blog, but it was a long story before that really came to fruition. But one of the things that came out of that was this focus on student agency, right? And this is part of the Honeycomb we have now. And I found myself diving into a much longer story about the origin of the Honeycomb and future ready schools. But when he was at the White House still, James was involved with the White House Student Film Festival, which was a nationwide K-12 student film festival. And unlike many other festivals, it was focused on K-12. A lot of student film festivals are essentially higher ed, like film school students. And a lot of K-12 film festivals are really regional. We've one in Southern California, for instance, but this was a nationwide K-12 film festival and was really special. And the students of a lot of the people in our network and our team were involved, and it was a really great experience. Apparently Obama said it was his favorite thing he did every year, but I'm sure he said that about a lot of things. But when Obama left office, that went away. And there was a clear void. And we thought to ourselves, like, hey, we're in a position where we've got this not only nationwide network, but global network. We've certainly got people with the capacity to run a competition like this, a student film festival. And we could do it international. And it's one of the things, by the way, that I felt was missing from the U.S. Department of Ed's version of Future Ready Schools, is they kind of explicitly said, we really only care about U.S. schools. And they kind of left aside that idea of diffusion of innovation across international borders that I think has actually been really important to at least my understanding of what's possible in education. And it's something I try to share with others. And I think you'll find it in the book too. So we said, what if we filled this void and created an international student film festival for K-12 students? And we started thinking about who good partners would be, and WeVideo was an obvious partner in this. And thankfully, they were on board. So we EdTechTeam and WeVideo have sponsored it the last 2 years, but we actually set up a separate nonprofit to run this. So props to Jenny McGarrett, because she's been really involved the whole time, and she's the president of the nonprofit now. And the idea is, and we just finished our second year, and we're going into our third. Hopefully, we don't have funding secured yet, but hopefully that'll work out. And you can go to studentvoice.org and donate for what it's worth. But we need to lock in our corporate partnerships again. But the idea is kids submit videos on a theme. They have to adhere to pretty strict requirements when it comes to intellectual property and digital citizenship. And then the videos are judged by a panel of students and teachers. We have student board members, by the way, on the board now too after our second year. And then there's a celebration of the winners at the ISTE conference. ISTE donates the space in the sort of AV production space. And this year, actually, we moved also to having our student board members MC the event. So it's this great celebration of student voice. The filmmakers are flown out to the event and given awards and that sort of thing, and their parents come. So it's a really special experience for the winners, of course, but it's also a great experience for all of the classes and all the teachers that participate over the course of the year. So, and the themes are typically pretty provocative and pretty focused on kids being able to create the world that they want for the future. So definitely in line with everything we're talking about today. And if you guys want to check it out, the listeners, it's studentvoice.org. And you and your students can participate in year 3.
And again, that link is studentvoice.org. The links to everything we're going to be talking about are over here in our show notes over on teachercast.net. This is TeacherCast Podcast, episode number 203. Talking today to Dr. Mark Wagner from EdTechTeam. You can find out more information at edtechteam.com. Now, Mark, you've been talking about the Honeycomb, and I want to talk a little bit about this because really you've created, or your team has created, a series of 6 pillars. And just to kind of go through them a little bit here, we have courageous leaders, we have empowered teachers, student agency, inspiring spaces, robust infrastructure, and engaged community.
Yep.
Clearly don't have time to go through every single thing in detail. We'll leave that for the next couple episodes. But when it comes to actually putting the future in front of us, you say that courageous leaders are connected, collaborative, and visionary risk takers, which I love that phrase, who support initiative and innovation in others. And you have your schools are, a little bit later in the book, it says schools are desperate for leaders who will set a long-range vision, complete with an urgent time schedule, and who will commit the energy and resources to ensure fulfillment. I'm sure many people who, it's a mouthful. I'm sure many people here are listening and going, all right, my superintendent gets up and says something, but then doesn't provide the support. Or we have a roadmap, but we don't know how we're going to get there, but we're trying to figure out backwards how to get this. Why is it important that we have not only visionary leaders, but we all know what's going on that roadmap to success?
Yeah, I actually think the figure it out as you go along method is a pretty good one. And we don't necessarily need to all know what's on that roadmap to success. It's good to have shared goals, and it's good to be audacious about those. But you can certainly figure it out as you go along. I think the adjective that we honed in on for that element of the Honeycomb, being courageous, really came from the fact that that looks different in different schools. But that was the unifying element we found when we walked into schools and said, like, oh, like this is special. This is something that impresses us, and this is something that we see as a future-ready school. And because this Honeycomb came out of that early work with future-ready schools. They've obviously done their own thing now, and that's another story. But at the time that we were working on it, this was the early versions of the Honeycomb. And part of the philosophy, by the way, is that courageous leadership is not enough. If that's the only thing you have and the leader leaves, all the initiatives die. You also need to be empowering teachers, and you need to be encouraging student agency and make sure that the space represents the learning philosophy that you want in the building. And then you need to be engaging community in that vision and, providing the robust infrastructure to support all that. Like if any of those pieces are missing, it sort of falls apart. But to focus particularly on the leaders, courageous leadership can look very different And we really didn't want to pigeonhole what that is in any more than I want to pigeonhole a teacher's curriculum or what they do with Google Docs, right? But the idea that the leader has to be courageous, I think, is the important thing. It's not terribly popular, by the way. It doesn't sell tickets. Leaders don't, I think, as a whole, don't want to acknowledge that they're not courageous or that they need training in being courageous. But the ones that do sort of take up the mantle, that put a vision out there and that stand behind and support the people at their sites, those are the ones where we see special things happen. And if you have a leader who's playing it safe, who's afraid of their leadership or afraid of their constituency or afraid to make a mistake, like those aren't the schools where we see anything interesting happening.
Well, I'm interested in the first word here of this definition. It says connected. Now, for many of us, we take the word connected and somehow we put the word Twitter. Is that what your definition is? Or are you saying connected as in the leader? You'll see that superintendent in the classrooms getting their hands dirty, connected with what's going on in their buildings?
Yeah, connected, I think all those adjectives are certainly open to interpretation, which is a good thing. But I think connected today does need to mean beyond the walls of your building, right? Particularly in a formal leadership role. And by the way, courageous leadership is also inclusive of teacher leadership and so on, student leadership. But in a formal leadership position, like a school principal, for instance, that can be a very isolating place, and you can fall easily into that role of a middle manager. And you've got to, at the very least, be networking with other principals, and that can look like traditional, meetings or conferences and socials, that kind of thing. But I think you gain a lot when you are reaching out beyond the borders of your school, the borders of your district, the borders of your state or country, and being an instrument for the diffusion of innovation. And that, I think, takes some courage to say, hey, I've seen this idea happening in Philly, or I've seen this idea happening in New Zealand, and I want to try it in my school in California. It takes some courage, but a lot less than doing it in a void, right? Like you're going to see what's working. You're going to get ideas from other people. You're going to have that synergy with other school leaders. And I don't really think that's possible if you're just leading a school in your hometown. It's certainly great to still be a good principal in a lot of other ways, but you're going to have a harder time innovating if you're not allowing yourself to connect with communities that are innovating in schools. You simply have blinders on. I mean, even doing what I do for as long as I've done it, I remember the first time talking to listening to a speaker from Australia, Tom March, I think was his name, and realizing, like, oh my God, ISTE in 2006, and realizing that, they didn't have No Child Left Behind, of course, right? But they weren't under, at the time, the same sorts of pressures around standardized tests and so forth. And he actually said something that stuck with me. I don't know if this story really fits here, but I ended up asking him, what do you say to teachers who feel like they can't try this? And we were talking about blogs and wikis and podcasts. It's the heyday of Web 2.0, right? And the edgy blogger sphere. And I said, what do you say for teachers who feel like they can't do this, that they're not supported by their leadership? And he said, be subversive. He went on to elaborate, but his instantaneous 2-word answer has stuck with me all this time. And hopefully I've done more good than harm by sharing this with educators over the years. But part of that courage, and I think this goes for building or district administrators too, if they're concerned about other layers of leadership, is be subversive. Like, do it first and then show everybody how awesome it was. It's the old ask forgiveness, not permission. But we see over and over in this community that it's awesome if you're just a little bit subversive and try something new and give your kids the opportunity to be creative and pursue their passions and make an impact in the world themselves.
Do you feel that leadership is something that is kind of born inside you, or is this a learned trait?
Oh, no. there might be a little bit of both, but I think even the bit that feels like it's born inside of you is probably pretty environmental in terms of how you grow up, who you grow up with, what sort of opportunities you had as a kid. In my case, I can see it a thousand ways looking back that my parents cultivated that. And today we, my team went through we did Leader Box for a full year. You can see one of the shelves back there, all the Leader Box books. And absolutely, like reading and learning from other leaders is going to help. It's going to open your eyes to things that you maybe weren't aware of or wouldn't have thought of. And it's going to build, especially over time, build patterns that you might not build on your own with only your own experience.
Much of our audience is in that tech coach genre right now where, we're classroom teachers and now suddenly we're leading programs. And for many of us, that doesn't mean administrator, but that still means administrating a program and doing all that stuff.
Yeah. Call it coordinator, right?
Coordinate all those different titles. You're in charge of your own destiny, really, as you're looking here. You also mentioned in the book about the Google pillars of innovation. And the one that it always sticks out is number 8, never fail to fail. Always try something. And that's a Google thing. I know that means something to you. That certainly means something here in TeacherCast. What does that mean? And how do we get through those tough times where you do hit that brick in the wall and you're like, how do you get back up?
I felt that right now. But some of the other phrases that go along with that for me are, and these come from the culture at Google. They certainly come from some older cultures in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. The idea of failing forward, right? We don't mean failure in the way that teachers often mean it, which is like sort of fall on your face with an F at the end of the semester kind of thing. But making mistakes and learning from them and moving forward from them. And the other phrase is failing fast. So making mistakes as soon as you can so that you can learn from them quickly, right? Rich Duvall spoke at one of our summits several years ago from the X Lab at Google, or just X for Alphabet now. And he described his job as failing fast. That was the mandate of his job. And when he was he has this great story about coming up with the idea for Project Loon, but to hone in on the important part, when they were first creating prototypes for Project Loon, which obviously provides internet access from the stratosphere for people on the ground. It's intended for developing countries where they don't have infrastructure for internet, that he had to basically crash as many balloons as he could, as fast as he could, so that he could learn what didn't work, so that they could get to what did. I think the way he told the story, it was like they named all the balloons alphabetically, and they got to like L or something before they had a successful balloon. But the idea was he was failing fast and failing forward and learning from his failures. And so, the other phrase they use at Google is never fail to fail. If you're playing it so safe that there's no failure involved, you're doing something wrong. There's a guy, I think it's a Mario Andretti quote too. If everything's under control, you're not moving fast enough.
Yes, I've heard that one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
When we're looking at this, there's so many teachers that are out there that want to take that same step that you have. That go from the classroom to being that entrepreneur, that edupreneur. What advice do you have for them? Is it go out and fail? Is it go out and try something? Is it wait till next summer, get through what advice do you have for anybody that wants to go out there and just find that side hustle, something that they're passionate in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at your show notes before jumping on, and you had said something about branding too, right? Mm-hmm. And building their own brand. And initially, I actually had sort of a negative reaction to that. Like, I know it's important to decide what your message is and decide what the personality of your brand is going to be, and to decide the name and the color and the logo and all of those things. But I do feel like we're at a place where that's detracting from the conversation in education, particularly in geeky ed tech circles. Mm-hmm. So I think I'll sort of begin my response with that sort of caution. Like, I feel like, having been involved with Twitter since the beginning in education, I mean, what was it, 2006 or something? And having been involved with the the edu blogosphere before that, if you will, and remembering those days of sort of going on Twitter and sort of finding cool stuff that people were sharing and feeling like anything I wrote for work or for school, I could turn around and share too. And I feel like that's changed. And some of that is my role is obviously different. When I was talking about taking an old Chromebook and converting it to Linux the other day, I had that experience again that people were, geeky folks were giving me all kinds of advice for free on Twitter. And I felt that sort of like camaraderie and community around it again. But I feel like a lot of that is missing now when so many of the educators who are doing cool stuff in their schools and wanting to share it are sort of doing that in the context of a brand. And obviously I say this as the CEO of a company and brand that's come a long way. But I feel like that detracts from things. And I feel like I'm part of that detraction right now too. Most of what I post is EdTechTeam related, right? And I think there's a lot of value in some wisdom I heard. Boy, in the early days of blogging, it would have been the late 90s even, a guy named Dave Weiner, who was an early blogger, and by the way, came up with the idea of a hyper camp, which we use for Spark Camp at the Innovator Academy and so on now, but or at least inspired it. But and he's not alone in saying this, but he said, send them away to bring them back, right? Like you've got to be pointing people towards things that are going to be valuable to them. You've got to be offering them things that are valuable to them. But ultimately, you probably can't be that prolific, and you probably ought to be acknowledging the work of others. And so, pointing them towards things that would be valuable to them could be really important. That said, I think reflecting back on my experience, like if you really are serious about building something outside of your job, you don't need to be serious about building something outside of your job and building a business in order to participate in this sort of global conversation and diffusion of innovation and that sort of thing. You can have a blog, you can have a podcast, and you can be sharing. You don't need to build a business out of it or build a brand out of it. But if you're going to, I think it's, reflecting on my experience, I think I would say do it right and build the foundation right from the beginning. One of the things I feel like I did well was incorporating up front and sort of sorting out that business structure up front and being clear about it with the people that I brought on to work with me. And I think, places I failed are times I was less clear or, bringing in professional help perhaps later than I should have, right? EdTechTeam's 13 years old, but we've had a marketing director for like a year and a half, and we had no marketing program before that, and we just hired our financial controller this year. I certainly worked with a CPA, and his firm took care of a lot for us before that. But I did a lot myself. I drew up a lot of the legal documents myself. We obviously have a lawyer now that works with us on a lot of things. So there's been an escalation of that, but I think I've never regretted the times that I did things right early on. Obviously, we cut a lot of corners and we flew by the seat of our pants and we made things happen we might not have made happen if we had been doing everything by the book. But I've never regretted doing anything carefully and right the first time. And if you're going to build a business, I would recommend thinking up front about how is that going to scale, right? Doing a service business is sort of the obvious next step for a lot of teachers, and that doesn't necessarily scale, and it's a pretty thankless job. Like we've worked really hard to diversify a little bit when it comes to making books or online classes, or we got lucky with launching Breakout EDU, but what does it look like for us to create Chrome extensions or create software or create a product that teachers would use that would be more scalable? I think that's where we need people's innovation and help and so forth. I don't know that I may be biased because there's so much competition in the professional development space right now, but we don't really need more brands around education technology professional development, right? On the bright side, I kind of feel like our work at EdTechTeam is sort of perhaps inspired and empowered a generation of teachers to do that sort of thing and to bring their message to the world. And I think that's really good. And that's something I'm sort of proud to be a part of. But I do think that sort of everybody on Twitter having their own brand is beginning to be counterproductive. And someone who's really, truly entrepreneurial and wants to launch something of value to others and hopefully a value to them over time, and eventually they should think more about what is the unique thing that they could bring or build or offer to the world, and not just be another one of what everybody else that's out there, and not want to be not aim for being an influencer or something, but what's the thing of value you're actually offering, right? And I hope that's as encouraging as it might be discouraging. But
well, look, if it is encouraging to you out there, please let us know. You can, of course, find Mark over at EdTechTeam. You can find us over here on TeacherCast. The book is called More Now. Mark, before we wrap down here, you end the book by saying that the mission is to encourage people to dream up the world you want to live in, and empower those to work and serve to do the same. I love that. It's very similar to what we believe here, being a place for teachers to help other teachers. Why is that important? Not just to the world, but why is that deeply important to Dr. Mark Wagner? And you also say, start by showing others what is possible. I'll throw that in there. But why is that an important way to end your book? And why is that an important way to kind of end and wrap up our conversation today?
Yeah, I think it sort of thank you, because I hope that this will be a good, encouraging note to end on. But I think it wraps up a lot of the themes we've talked about today, in the sense that we really shouldn't count on somebody else to create the future that we want, right? We need everybody's voice in there, and we need our own voice in there. And I think among the reasons for a teacher to launch a business, that's probably among the best of them also, is to have your voice out there and have your vision out there and to help create the future you want to see. I think I often talk to educators and students who want something different and better for schools, but feel like they're stuck with what they have, or it's not their place to make the change, or they don't have the ability to make the change. But every single one of them has far more ability than they might be giving themselves credit for, right? I certainly believe in our ability to create a better future, and I think we need everybody involved with that. I think for me, when you ask about why it's so important to me, so much of my life has been dedicated to trying to bring about a better future as fast as possible, right? I grew up with Star Trek, and I grew up with the NASA poster on my wall that said we'd be on Mars by 2014. And I went to school to be an aerospace engineer. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo to study astronautics, and I had classes like spacecraft system design and orbital mechanics, and there was nothing to work on.
Mark, I want
to. Sorry, I feel like I need to wrap that up. But
no, go ahead. Floor's yours.
The last manned spacecraft our country launched was designed before I was born, and I was studying in a field with nothing to work on. I had a buddy at USC that went to study aerospace engineering, and he started in a class of 73 and he ended in a class of 3, and he went to work at Boeing and he worked on the space shuttle. But in a lot of ways, that the future that we thought we would have, and I talk about Star Trek, and I talk about Back to the Future, and I talk about U2's guitarist, The Edge, being a geek who came back to us from the future, and Google talks about Sergey coming back to us from the future, and I want to see that happen. There's so much to get frustrated about in today's world. And maybe more so in recent years, but there's so much that's come a long way because everybody's sort of scrubbed in and got involved. If I can leave a book recommendation, I read a book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And it was probably the most uplifting book I've read in ages, because by almost any measure, the world is much, much better today than it's ever been in the past. And that's largely because of people working together using science and technology to solve problems. And if we could be in a world where that is more and more prevalent and more normalized, that's what I want to work toward. And it takes a degree of tolerance and a degree of inclusivity, because we're going to need to embrace the diversity of passions and experience and perspectives that the world has to offer to make that happen. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think that's ultimately why it's important to me that everybody get involved in dreaming up the world they want to live in and creating that future as an architect of the possible.
As a teacher, as a business person, as a guy that's trying to do something similar on this little podcast here, I certainly echo all of that. Mark, I want to first of all say thank you for coming on the show today. But before I let you go, there is a tradition here on TeacherCast.
Right.
I'm wondering if I can put you up for the challenge. This is something we call the Jersey 5. 5 questions to get you thinking and to really inspire what is great in this world. Would you be interested in taking the Jersey 5?
Oh, of course.
All right. I'm going to tell you now, the first one's a little easy. It gets a little harder. Number one, your favorite Twitter account or hashtag to follow?
Oh, boy. Well, that's a good one. Twitter's been bringing back to me some old favorites recently. I've been seeing Wes Fryer and Will Richardson and Lucy Gray. Favorite Twitter account or hashtag to follow? Naturally, I follow EdTechTeam. I follow Google EI. That might be the other one. I think I've obviously been that's the Google for Education Innovators, formerly the Google Certified Teachers. Like, that's a program I've been involved with for 13 years, and it remains the program I'm most passionate about, and that community is so prolific and so dynamic and so innovative. I always love seeing what they're posting and sharing with each other and with the world, and particularly with the Academy the way it is these days, over the last 3 years, with each of them launching an innovator project over the course of the year. Like, it's just really amazing to see all of that take shape. So I still get a lot out of following that tag.
Number 2, your favorite educational tool, and I'll let you do one that says Google in front of it and one that doesn't say Google in front of it.
Oh yeah, favorite educational tool. Well, I think just broadly, I'm still going to say blogs. People seem to need fewer blogging workshops these days, but I think if there's one thing you could do with your students to sort of have the maximum impact on their education, or one technology to use, that would be it. When I did my PhD and studied video games and learning, probably the biggest value I found was, if kids are going to play games and learn from them, they need to be reflecting on that, and that bring in that element of metacognition and publishing and sharing and commenting on each other's thoughts about it. That's where the real value was, not when they played the game, but after, when they reflected on it. Right?
Nice. All right, number 3. These are going to get harder. The best advice you have ever been given as a, and sometimes I put teacher, business owner, professional, whatever that word is. Sometimes we say podcaster, but I'll let you fill in the blank. Best advice you've ever been given as a.
I know things like this come to mind all the time, and I have so many little anecdotes, but it's tough to come up with one on the spot like this that would be the best advice I've been given. I don't know. Maybe I can come back to that one.
All right. I'm telling you, they're going to get harder here.
Yeah. All right.
Number 4. What do you? Okay, so I'm gonna give you this sentence the way that I usually give it, and we'll tweak it as it needs. But the sentence is: what do you hope your students remember about you when they graduate at the end of the year? So maybe for you, it's what do you hope people take away from an EdTechTeam event? What do you hope people take away from your book? From your some form of what do you hope people take away from Dr. Mark Wagner?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always come back to that. I hope they leave inspired and empowered, right? I hope they they leave with a sense of connection, I think, to my vision for the future. Like, I hope that I'm somewhat successful in passing that on, that they want to see sort of that peaceful, inclusive, progressive, exciting future for themselves and for their kids, I think. But when I really think about being in a classroom or working with kids at a student summit or even working with teachers at, face-to-face in a PD situation, maybe not so much in an audience, but in a workshop, like I want them to leave feeling like we connected and feeling like I cared about them, right? And I think that's a pretty core thing for a teacher to feel.
All right. You're still on the hook for number 3, but we're going to go to number 5 now. What is the best teachable moment you've ever had?
Oh, for myself?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many.
Something involving family, something involving PD, something involving...
Yeah, there's so many. I remember one in particular because I used it in an interview years ago. But we had a family night. So speaking of engaged community, we were launching. I think this was on the handheld program that I mentioned. We were launching these handhelds and needed to communicate to parents what kids were going to be bringing home and what the expectations were and that sort of thing. And we had an evening event planned in a community, and it was one of these schools that there was clearly like two sides of the tracks community, and this was the night sort of on the less well-to-do side of the tracks, right? And totally unrelated to that, I got violently sick. And I think it must have been like 2 PM or something. I went home from work and I couldn't, I was done for. And the event must have been like 7:00 that night or something. And by the time it rolled around, I was in bed and completely missed it. And, and it was, as you can imagine, every sort of feeling about like, the translator was there and this guy didn't show up and and the families were there and all that. So it was definitely a low point, but that's one of the things I did was write a letter to the families and make sure it was sent out to everybody who also received the invitation. So it was kind of overkill because it didn't just go to the few families that showed up. It went out to everybody that got invited. But I think that to draw a lesson from it, that idea of acknowledging your mistakes and apologizing for them and doing what you can to make it better is always a teachable moment. And that's something that we try to teach our kids. It's something that stands out for me in stories and it's interesting to see how often people's heroes are people who can do that well. They're not right all the time, but they own it when they're not, right?
All right, so I'm going to give you 2 options here. This will be like make a deal. We can go back to question number 3, or you can take door number 2.
Oh, what's door number 2?
You gotta.
I will say about question 3 that I've got this great shelf of leadership books behind me and EdTech books and others at home, and the people I work with are truly my heroes. But I think I'm pretty terrible at, or have been pretty terrible at mentorship, and I've got I'm doing better at that now than I ever have. I'm actually in a Vistage CEO group. I have a Vistage chair that's mentoring me, and I've found a lot of value in that. So anybody that's sort of going down that road and is interested in that, they have a key man group too, a key person group, I suppose they should call it. That's sort of like for folks who are not CEOs but want to develop their leadership capacity. So I get a lot of great advice from them. Like monthly, I have a moment where I'm like, oh, yeah, of course. So those things are not coming to mind right now.
That's okay. Look,
but I think the idea of taking advantage of mentors is really valuable.
I'm going to give you door number 2 anyway, because I wanted to end on this, and I think this will kind of get you thinking. What is your favorite all-time U2 lyric?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, it's probably Dream Out Loud, but I'll give it another thought. And my all-time favorite U2 song, let me start there, is well, my favorite album is Zooropa, and I think the title song, which is not the one I was going to talk about, is really about it starts with this cacophony of technical sounds, and it's this auditory chaos, and it's all about sort of being lost in the modern world. Right now, this was written in 1993, but to any degree that the modern world is overwhelming and dispiriting in 1993, that's more true in 2019. Right, I think it's sort of stood the test of time. And it's just there's these lyrics at the beginning around, and I have no religion, and I have no map, and I have no reasons to get back, right? But by the end of that song, they've broken out of it, and Edge's guitar is coming through, and Bono's voice is coming through, less distorted, and you get she's got to dream up the world she wants to live in. She's got to dream out loud, and let's get your head out of the mud, baby. Let's take the overground, and it's this really hopeful. Anthemic song at the end. So I think, for me, that's I'll fall back on that. Is the dream of the world you want to live in.
I will put a link to that in our show notes. Mark, I want to say thank you for your time. Everything that we're looking at doing, you can certainly find over here on TeacherCast Podcast, episode number 203. Mark, I'll let you give the last words here. Where can somebody find you if they have any questions, if they have any, looking for advice on anything? Where do we find out more information about Dr. Mark Wagner?
Sure thing. I mean, at Mark Wagner on Twitter is a great place. I'm Mark Douglas Wagner on Facebook, and I see more and more interaction there. A couple of things that we had in the notes we didn't get to talk about. Obviously, you can find everything we do at edtechteam.com. But if you are in a position, like you said, of being a coach, an instructional coach of any kind, or if you're a leader with coaches at your site or district, check out dynamiclearningproject.com, because that's our mentoring program for coaches that we developed in partnership with Google over the last 2.5 years. And obviously, if you need help not just with education technology professional development, but with transforming the culture at your school, the book is a great place to start. And EdTechTeam is a transformation partner with Google, in addition to our being the partner of the year for education last year. So we'd love to hear from you. I'd love to learn what you're up to and see how we can help.
And of course, we hope that you guys had a great time on this episode. One more time, thank you to EdTechTeam and Mark Wagner for coming on the show today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on Twitter at TeacherCast. Leave us a voice message over at teachercast.net/voicemail. I would love to hear from you guys and learn how you guys are getting ready for the school year. And that wraps up episode number 203 of the TeacherCast Podcast. On behalf of everybody here in the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.